Let's take a look at the capital budgeting decision, which is a finance way of considering return on investment, which we think of in two terms, which we call net present value, or not just simple rate of return, but we generally refer to it as IRR or internal rate of return. So, if, for example, you were to make a $5,000 initial investment and for 6 years you would get a $1,000 return, before taking a finance class, you might have said, oh, that's easy. Six times 1,000 is 6,000, less my $5,000 is I make $1,000. But we think about it in slightly different terms. So let's go ahead and, in this simple case, dive right down into making a net present value and IRR model. So the first thing we'll do is document our rate of return as being 10%. And that we think of as being the cost of capital or what we could get by investing in something that wasn't this project, but something else that we know that we have experience in that has given us traditional returns that the investors demand. We also then think of our cash flows as going out as having a series of cash flows that start with the immediate investment period, which we call period zero. Period zero then extends itself into the analytic period, which for us in this case would be the 6 years worth of returns that you could get by making this initial investment of $5,000. Now, cash flows out are the things that generally make us sad, but the things that make us happy are cash flows in. And that would be the $1,000 return that you would get on a cash flows basis each and every year for those 6 years. When we have cash flows in and cash flows out, what that then lends us to is the concept of cash flows net, where cash flows net are equal to what you get in less what you get out, so that in that first period, period zero, you can see that our cash flows at net are a negative $5,000, indicating that we have to make a capital commitment in the beginning in order to be able to get a reasonable expectations of cash flows in the future. That same cash flows net formula applies to every year so that you see in the second year, for example, when we take our cash flows in of 1,000 less no other cash flows out, we get that $1,000 positive return. And if we just analyze that 6 years, you see over here, it would suggest the sum of our 6 times 1,000 cash flows in less our 5,000 initial investment would look like a positive profit or return on investment of $1,000. The problem is, though, we have not taken into consideration the cost of capital, which requires us to use a present value calculation. So let's go ahead and drop a line right here between the out and the net to indicate that this is a formula. And then let's think about this present value formula for a minute. So if we do equals PV and open a parentheses, let's find our rate and use our F4 to lock it in, comma, the number of periods for this would be our first period or period zero. We're going to do comma twice next since we're going to skip over the payment. And then here comes your little trick. Because of the way that Excel thinks about the time value of money functions, we need to flip the sign on the cash flows net. So we're going to hit negative and select our cash flows net so that when we close our parenthesis and hit enter and look at our formula, indeed it suggests for us in that first period that our present value is a negative $5,000. Let's go ahead and format that properly. And then if we copy and paste that across, we can look in each period and see actually the $1,000 that you get one period away, because it's discounted at 10%, is really only worth in present value terms like $900 today. Whereas the $1,000 cash flow net that you get in year six, when discounted at a rate of 10%, is really only worth like $564 to us today. So if we put that together in what we call NPV, NPV then would just be the sum of all of those present values added up so that we take the discounted cash flows amount, and that discounted cash flows amount, when summed up with our initial present value, actually suggests to us that this investment would lose $644.74. And when NPV is less than zero, that is when we have A no-go investment, meaning it would be like you paid $5,000 immediately to get back only 4,000, roughly $400 in total, thus losing more than 600 and some dollars immediately. We qualify that in terms that the world can understand more generally by thinking about it in terms of IRR, or internal rate of return. And indeed, in this case, if we use equals and then IRR and open a parentheses, and the key thing is your values for input in IRR are these cash flows net that we select and close the parenthesis, and we see that we get an IRR of about 5.47%. And what that suggests is that when the IRR is less than that cost of capital, or what we called rate percent, we also have a no-go project, because why would you choose to take a 5.4% return from this stream of cash flows when you know you have the opportunity to use history and invest in something else that is more satisfying to the investors who expect a 10% rate of return? We'll come back with another video shortly about how to expand this analysis to include not just cash flows net, but the projection of an income statement.